That's where I first met him. In a minute, we were at Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street, the busiest intersection in all of London. The streets were thronged at this hour, teeming with tourists and locals all out for a night on the town. It was the kind of area that, much like Times Square in New York, attracts crowds who come to see the crowds. And then there's the whole left-right thing. An Englishman will want to walk to the left, of course. But since a full half of the people on the streets are tourists who want to go right, what you are left with is a complete muddle of head fakes and dance steps as the opposing crowds attempt to sift through one another. Alan Henry bulled his way through the milling bodies and stomped across Oxford Street, heading into Soho. The theater crowds were just letting out. Alan told us that this guy he wanted us to meet was a favorite author of his, who he happened to bump into in a bar. The next Salman Rushdie, he said. Believe it. Alan Henry was always going on about some new writer. As we walked, he was swigging from a huge flask he kept with him at all times in his vest pocket. He passed it to me, and I took a slug. Oxford Street was especially crowded as a large semicircle of people had gathered around the entrance to the Virgin Records superstore to catch a glimpse of some American professional wrestlers who were apparently shopping. Alan was a big fan of this particular sport. It's the modern Roman arena, he said. The cultural feed bag for the great unwashed masses. Just like Elizabethan theater. Gutter poetry, Mick muttered, flicking his cigarette ash. We plowed through the craning throng and made our way down Frith Street. When we reached Soho Square, Alan took a couple of skipping steps and started doing slow, heavy cartwheels through the cigarette-butt grass of the tiny square. Mick and I trotted after him to keep up. Alan rolled through to the other side and into the street, where he rounded off his last turn with a whoop and a deep bow. Alan burned like a torch in the night. He was excited for us to meet his new friend, and remembering him now, how I wish I could see him like that again. I think that maybe I was their last hope, the last chance the museum and Dr. Klein had to get the Stela solved. I was perfectly happy out in Abu Roash, just outside Cairo, working on a dig with an Italian group who liked my work, when Klein cabled me from London. I was getting to the point in my life when I really should have been thinking of settling into something with some kind of security and retirement. But it never seemed like it would end. I know Mick resented the fact that the board stuck me in his flat on Great Russell Street, 3 blocks from the museum. I didn't mind the cramped living arrangements too much because the perks were huge. Unlimited access to the British Museum day or night, with the most extensive collection of Egyptian antiquities in the world. Guaranteed publication and a bonus for solving the Stela of Paser. Our flat was a matchbox. Mick and I shared a bedroom, and when I sat up and swung my legs off the narrow bed, my knees touched the edge of Mick's mattress. You had to leave the bathroom door open to sit down on the toilet. The roof was steeply sloped because we were in an attic space, and to get to the one small window in the narrow rectangle that was our living room, you had to get down on your hands and knees. It had been built for diminutive 17th-century Englishmen, not massive, sprawling Americans like Alan Henry or chubby types like myself. Mick was small enough, built like a reed quill, or the wandering snake hieroglyph that curls over the moon. Still, I didn't mind. We never spent any time there. We practically lived in our lab with the Stela. The surviving fragment of the Stela of Paser is 112 centimeters by 85 centimeters, a large section of the original slab-like limestone monument, the kind often set up in tombs or temples. It's essentially shaped like a gravestone, and our conception of the gravestone comes from this Egyptian form. It has a deeply incised frieze of deities along the top, with the rest of the tablet covered in a grid of incised lines, each square containing one hieroglyphic symbol, 67 squares wide and 80 squares deep. We know this based on calculations, as a good portion of the bottom section is worn beyond recognition. Only about 2/3 of the text is available. There is also a name or signature in the top corner, identifying the author as one Paser, true of voice. True of voice is an ancient Egyptian epithet referring to judgment after death, indicating the person as deceased. With this title, Paser was claiming the knowledge of the dead, an understanding of the other side of life, as well as this one. The top line of text that lies outside the grid reads like a title or set of instructions. It reads, "As for this writing, it is to be read 3 times. Its like has not been seen before, heard since the time of the god. It is set up in the temple of Mut, Lady of Isheru, for eternity, like the sun, for all time." That's the easy part. It's the 3 times that throws us off, because we can only read the text in 2 ways at this point, horizontally and vertically. The other obvious possibilities, like backward and diagonal, have been tried and proved unsuccessful. Most of it is a direct hymn to the goddess Mut, an obscure figure in the Egyptian pantheon, popular among ancient Egyptians but little studied in modern scholarship. She is mostly referred to as some sort of moon goddess, often contained in what Egyptologists call crossword pieces, like the Stela of Paser. The truth is, I'd been working on the stela for a few months and produced nothing. All the other translating work for the British Museum had been offloaded to Mick to allow me to concentrate fully on this one project. Mick had a lot of these projects already laid out on our shared work table in the lab in the basement of the British Museum, covering most of it with his guides and script keys. I didn't mind, since I had most of my guides and grids pinned on the walls. In our lab, the stela itself was fixed to an iron stand, angled like a drafting desk, with a wire grid that I'd rigged up on the front surface. Our lab was bigger than our whole apartment, and we had it all to ourselves, just the 2 of us and the stela. That night in late October, Alan Henry brought us to the Lupo Bar, a tight, deeply cushioned place with a plaque hanging out front depicting Romulus and Remus suckling the she-wolf. We found Alan's writer sitting on a couch set in one of the back rooms. He had a young woman draped on his shoulder. Alan thumped off for the bar, so I took it upon myself to do introductions. "I'm Walter Rothschild," I said, "and this is Dr. Mick Wheelhouse." We pumped hands and said English sorts of things like cheers and right and brilliant, and then sat down. Alan brought over a rack of double gin and tonics with a plate of lime wedges. The writer was a rumpled Anglo-Pakistani named Hanif, and his lady friend was called Erin. She had spiky black hair with purple tips like a crown, and wore a tight, long-sleeved black top that formed around each individual breast like a mold. The gin tasted like clear electricity and popped blue lights in my eyes, deepening the music's pulse into a comforting, though rapidly increasing beat. Hanif was a swarthy fellow with a wild head of curly jet-black hair. I'm pretty sure he was already stinking drunk when we got there. Alan said Hanif was supposed to be something special, a hot writer who was part of the new wave of Pakistani neo-post-colonialism that was sweeping Britain and the U.S. Hanif said he met Erin last week, on holiday. She offered us some cigarettes in a silver case, and I took one. Hanif began enthusiastically lecturing us on the merits of British women versus Pakistani, his eyes squared and his lips flecked with spittle. Erin nodded and smoked, and when Alan came back with more drinks, she sat up quickly and downed her glass, sucked on the lime wedge for a moment, and went back to Hanif's shoulder with a contented look. She looked supremely relaxed. Her eyes blinked slowly, languidly. Then Alan explained what it was Mick and I did for a living, though I don't think Hanif was ever quite clear on it. But Erin started asking me questions about my work. Normally I'd be scared to death of a woman like Erin. She was young and beautiful. But I was feeling the gin coursing through my arms and legs, so I slouched in the deep velvet cavity of my chair and started telling her about the Stela of Paser, but somehow ended up talking about my daughter, Zenobia, and her mother, Helen. Zenobia's mother was a musician I met while I was at Berkeley. Helen was the first chair cellist for the San Francisco Symphony for 7 years. I can't say that our marriage, short as it was, or our falling in love, was accidental or tragic, but I didn't see it coming. Helen played Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 for her thesis recital, and sitting in the front row of the auditorium, I felt for the first and last time the truest stirrings of something like love. It's true I should have known better. I work in lost time, in the lasting binds of history.